Imagine a city that shines like a jewel in the desert. Its walls rise so high that even the boldest warrior thinks twice before attacking. On its streets, order prevails, not out of fear, but through law. Inside, one of the most extraordinary wonders of the world, gardens that seem to float in the air. Babylon, a city of legend, a civilization that was ahead of its time, and a ruler who changed history, Hammurabi. But do you know what's most interesting? If you lived in ancient Babylon, no matter whether you were a merchant, farmer, or even a thief, your life would be governed by one of the oldest known legal codes in the world. Today, we'll tell the story of how Hammurabi built the power of Babylon, how law became a tool of politics, and how one of the most mysterious constructions of antiquity came into being, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And in the end, we'll debunk a few myths. How did Babylon transform from a regular settlement into the center of the universe? When you think of Babylon, you probably picture a grand, opulent city with legendary hanging gardens. But what if I told you that at first, Babylon was just one of many cities that no one really took seriously? Yes, before it became the ancient New York, it was more like, well, a second-tier city. Then came Hammurabi, and the man who said, "What if I just take over all of Mesopotamia?" And he did. Imagine Mesopotamia as the ancient version of Game of Thrones. Alliances, betrayals, wars for influence. It had everything, except instead of dragons, they had complex irrigation systems. Babylon wasn't exactly in the favored position, as giants like Assyria and Elam were in control. The Sumerians were stepping off the stage, but their influence was still huge. And then Hammurabi appeared. He wasn't the type of brutal warrior who solved problems with a sword. He was the kind of guy who preferred to think things through before setting anything on fire. Other kings played at wars while he waited. He built, he planned, and he did it in a way no one expected. Instead of diving headfirst into battle like a crazy berserker, Hammurabi invested in something that, by ancient standards, was revolutionary: the economy and diplomacy. He improved the irrigation system: more water, more crops, more food, more money. And as you know, when you have money, people start to take you seriously. He formed strategic alliances, not just military ones, but also commercial. He created a web of dependencies where everyone thought they were benefiting, until they realized they were just being subordinated to Babylon. He waited for the right moment. While his enemies weakened through internal conflicts, he entered the scene like the master of the second act in an action movie and took control. And then, when the right moment came, he struck. But not in the style of barbarian hordes that burn everything in their path. Hammurabi wasn't the type to conquer a city and leave it in ruins. No, he had a different tactic. He took cities and immediately implemented his rule. Instead of chaos, he brought order. He didn't destroy, he reorganized. His conquests were more like corporate takeovers than brutal invasions. He created a legal system that remains a symbol of effective governance. Yes, that famous Code of Hammurabi, which contains rules about everything, from trade contracts to what happens if your neighbor spills sewage on your land. Spoiler, it wasn't welcomed. The result? In just a few decades, he turned Babylon into an absolute powerhouse. Mesopotamia was no longer a collection of rival city-states. Now, Hammurabi was calling the shots. And the best part, his empire wasn't just built on strength, but on a system that lasted longer than he did. It was a master-level strategy. Instead of winning a battle, he won the entire story. And that's what set him apart. He didn't conquer the world in the name of chaos. He conquered it in the name of order. And that's just the beginning of his genius. It started innocently. A few battles here, a few cities brought under control there, seizing key territories. A typical path for an ambitious ruler. From the perspective of his rivals, Hammurabi looked like just another guy who would make a bit of a fuss and then end up forgotten among a pile of obscure kings. Well, they were very wrong. Before anyone realized it, Babylon went from a boring middle-tier city to the star of Mesopotamia, and Hammurabi became the ruler calling the shots. How did that happen? A pure accident? A lucky coincidence? Not even close. Hammurabi, the guy who played 4D chess while others were counting sheep. First, politics first, then swords. Most rulers of the time followed a simple rule: see a city, attack the city, burning ruins, bon success. Hammurabi approached things with more finesse. He knew that war wasn't just about battles, but also manipulation, strategy, and patience. What did he do? He built a network of alliances from which no one emerged unscathed. First, he offered a hand as a friend, and then subtly created problems for his rivals, waiting for them to weaken each other. And when they were at their breaking point, here came Babylon, all in gold. Second, chaos? Not in my kingdom. You conquer half of Mesopotamia, people speak different languages, follow different beliefs, and each has their own set of rules. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, right? Most rulers would try to suppress rebellion by force, but Hammurabi had a better idea. He created a system that enforced itself, and not just any system. Thus, the Code of Hammurabi was born, the first great handbook on how to rule and not go crazy. And it wasn't some boring list of regulations that only the tax office chief would read. No, Hammurabi engraved it in stone and placed it in public spaces so that absolutely everyone, from the farmer to the rich merchant, knew the rules of the game. Third, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Justice or medieval MMA? The principle that went down in history. But was it really fair? Let's be honest. It depended on who you were. If you were rich, well, you could always pay your way out. If not, well, you'd better watch your eyes and teeth. But one thing can't be denied. The Code of Hammurabi shaped the way we look at law and justice. It brought order, gave people a sense that there were clear rules of the game, and that they weren't at the mercy of a local judge's mood. One thing is certain, he wasn't a king who just happened to stumble onto the throne and get lucky. He knew what he was doing. Every move he made was part of a larger plan. While others swung their swords blindly, he was building an empire that would last for centuries. And now the question, was he a great reformer who brought order to Mesopotamia? Or was he a ruthless strategist who ruled with an iron fist? History doesn't give simple answers, but one thing is certain. Without him, Babylon wouldn't have become a legend. Most people think of the Code of Hammurabi as just an ancient collection of brutal laws, like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Sounds like the script for a bloody revenge movie, right? Sure, but the reality is far more complicated. And interestingly, quite logical, because the Code of Hammurabi wasn't just about punishments and executions straight out of a horror film. It was a system that kept Babylon in check and organized society like a well-oiled machine. Trade, marriages, debts, land ownership, family relations, and even the prices of services. Yes, if someone in ancient Babylon tried to charge you an arm and a leg for grain, they might be in for a surprise. Imagine life back then. You bought a sheep, but it turned out it had suspiciously bad breath and died after 3 days. The code determined who was responsible. A builder constructed a house that collapsed? Oops, they paid the price, quite literally. Hammurabi didn't mess around with half measures. But you know what was truly revolutionary? The fact that the law was public. The ruler didn't govern based on personal whim. There was no, because the king said so. There was the law, engraved in stone and publicly displayed. Did everyone understand it? Well, here's the catch. Only the elite could read it, but the fact that anyone could walk up and see these rules was groundbreaking. It was like ancient Babylon's first version of a user agreement. Only here, agreeing to the terms could end with your hand being chopped off. And yes, the code was harsh. Break the law? You'd better pray to the gods, because if you were a doctor and something went wrong, you might lose your hand. If a son raised his hand against his father, that hand wasn't going to serve him much longer. Sounds terrifying? Probably. But it wasn't blind sadism. It was a method for maintaining stability in a society full of different cultures and languages. Chaos? Hammurabi didn't have that in mind. But now, hold on. It's time to debunk a myth. Was the Code of Hammurabi the first legal system in history? No, Sumerian law codes, like the Code of Ur-Nammu or the Code of Lipit Ishtar, already existed. What Hammurabi did, however, was something others couldn't. He created a law that wasn't just a list of rules, but the foundation of the state. It couldn't be changed on a whim. It was written down, public, and permanent, like the ancient version of a constitution. Now think about this. Thousands of years have passed since then, but the idea that the law should be clear, accessible, and binding for everyone still holds strong today. Hammurabi was a guy who, in some ways, was ahead of his time. But did his legacy end with just the law? Not exactly, because Babylon under his rule wasn't just a city of paragraphs and harsh sentences. It was also an empire of great buildings, trade, and culture. And one of the most legendary constructions still stirring the imagination today was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. One of the 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Sounds epic, right? But wait, did they even exist? Imagine this, a multi-level structure full of greenery, waterfalls cascading down stone terraces, exotic flowers, palms, and vines winding overhead. The heart of a desert city transformed into a tropical oasis. This doesn't sound like ancient Middle Eastern architecture. It sounds like something a billionaire from Dubai would order in the 21st century. According to legend, the gardens were created by Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century before Christ for his wife, Midas. You know how it goes. Yeah, you want to impress your girl, so you buy her flowers. Nebuchadnezzar? He took it a step further and decided to create an entire jungle in the middle of the desert. Midas came from Media, modern-day Iran, where it was green, mountainous, and cool, but Babylon? Well, it was a great but scorching metropolis surrounded by sand. So if this is true, Nebuchadnezzar set the bar for romance at a level that's impossible for mortals. The problem is, we have no evidence of it. Ancient historians like Strabo and Josephus wrote about the Hanging Gardens, but to this day, not a single trace of their existence has been found. No ruins, no inscriptions, no plaque that says, "Warning, do not step on the grass." Nothing. So what happened? Was it all just a myth? Hypothesis 1. The Greeks got it wrong. It's possible that the ancient Greeks who wrote about the Hanging Gardens simply attributed them to the wrong city. In the 9th century before Christ, the Assyrian king Sennacherib built extensive gardens in Nineveh, modern-day Iraq, with a brilliant irrigation system. Archaeologists have found ruins of aqueducts and mechanisms that could have powered massive gardens. So maybe the Hanging Gardens existed, just not in Babylon, but in Nineveh? Perhaps the story got mixed up over the centuries. After all, the ancient Greeks didn't have Wikipedia to check their facts. Hypothesis 2. They existed, but disappeared without a trace. Or maybe they did exist, but earthquakes, wars, and plunder took their toll. Babylon was destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed again, and finally, the stones from its ruins were taken and used to build other cities. So, if the gardens did exist, they could have simply vanished like the legend of Atlantis, only in the desert, not underwater. Hypothesis 3. A myth that got out of control? Or maybe the Hanging Gardens never existed at all? Perhaps it was just a literary invention, a vision of an ideal city meant to showcase the power of Babylon. Maybe ancient authors just passed down this story, and each one added something new until we ended up with waterfalls, terraces, and probably even magical unicorns in the background? So, will we ever find evidence of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon? Who knows? But one thing is certain. Their legend has survived for thousands of years and still ignites the imagination. And if history teaches us anything, it's that sometimes myths are more powerful than reality. Under Hammurabi's rule, Babylon became one of the most important cities of antiquity. It was there that the foundations of law, politics, and administration were laid, enduring for thousands of years. His code became an inspiration for many later legal systems, and his legend endures to this day. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon, and leave a comment. I want to hear what surprised you the most. Give it a thumbs up, share this episode with friends who love history's mysteries, and join our growing community of history seekers. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. See you in the next episode.